Welcome to the podcast, David. I'm so happy to hear about your journey and kind of how you got to this spot that you are today in your career. Happy to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to talk.
Let's take it from the top. How would you describe your current job title and your roles? What do you do for a living?
I'm a pediatric oncology nurse and take care of kids who have cancer, hematology disorders. Many of them go to bone marrow transplant. So these days, primarily a bone marrow transplant nurse, which I don't know how much about pediatric cancer, but it's kind of the last stop for many of these kids who have the really refractory cancers. They're either going to get a bone marrow transplant or they're going to die.
I actually was an oncology nurse for adults. I've never had to actually treat children. It was one of the things that I knew I could not physically, emotionally handle. But I did do a stint in the bone marrow transplant unit. So I do remember taking care of adults that had gotten bone marrow transplant. I cannot imagine what it would be like to take care of children that needed bone marrow transplants. So what led you to, I guess, becoming a nurse? Oh, well, that's not all you do, correct? That's an incredible part of your career, but that's not the only part of what you do, correct?
Like you said, I'm a podcaster and I do lots of writing. I wrote a book. Before I was a nurse, I was a sculptor and a painter, and I actually had a business making kind of large-scale sculptures for hotels and restaurants and convention centers for about 6 years after college. And then I decided I wanted to do something a little bit more humanistic with my time. So I went to nursing school.
One of the questions I typically ask people is to take me through the moment they decided to become a nurse and what led them to become a nurse, and then walk me through till the spot that how they kind of made those micro decisions and little turns and shifts in their career to where they are today. And I guess we can take it from that point, but tell me a little bit about your podcast and kind of what it is that you talk about on your podcast, and then a little bit more expound upon what you wrote about.
Yeah. So the Nurse Papa podcast, it's really about being a human parent in this world from the perspective of a nurse who takes care of kids. So I tell these very typical yet amazing stories about parenthood, all my fumbles and mistakes. And I really try to normalize that there is no parent that is perfect. And it's not perfect being a parent. It's hard. So there's that part of the podcast. I tell stories. And I have another segment called Dear Nurse Papa, where a listener writes into me and I answer their parent question. And then I have a third section where I tell stories about nursing. So I really try to kind of hone in on all the very important parts of my life and tell a funny yet really important story about where I am and how I got there. Yeah. And the funnest part about my podcast is that my daughter and my son often take part.
Yes, that's what I also liked about it when I listened. I thought it was a very interesting and creative way to describe different conversations that you were having with your children, and then also the processing that you do when you walk away. Because as a parent, I really related to that, because there are moments that my son will say or do something, and then I'll walk away and I'll think, that was a teaching moment for me, And so hearing your podcast and listening to how you described different moments or different situations with your children and how insightful and deep you are.
Were you listening to the right podcast?
Yes, I was.
Nurse Papa podcast?
Yes, Nurse Papa podcast, for sure. And again, just walking away thinking, I'm glad I'm not the only parent that had to kind of check myself, or I had to kind of shift my perspective on something, because you're right, there is no perfect parent. Even though there's no manual, you don't get you read all these books about how to be a great parent, but each kid needs different things, and it's really hard to know what children need. And then also, I think that they're here on earth to teach us a lot about ourselves. So
absolutely.
I think that's a really cool perspective that your podcast brings to the podcast airways.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely glad that you shared. Tell me a little bit about your book, your Nurse Papa book.
So the book is called Nurse Papa, 16 Meditations on Parenthood from a pediatric oncology nurse. Yeah, the book is really about that crazy intersection of caring for sick and dying kids as a nurse and trying to raise my healthy ones. At first I was really just trying to tell a story, because as a pediatric nurse and specifically a oncology nurse, there is just so much human drama. It is just wild what I encounter every day. It runs the gamut from joy to terror to pain to abject sadness. And I just wanted people to see what other people go through. And that was my first intention, just to start writing these stories down. And it changed. Like any really valid form of art, it evolved. And eventually I started to look at nursing through the eyes of a parent, and what I could learn from these parents who are going through these, horrible situations, and from these kids. And it just came down to these amazing lessons that I wanted to show to other people.
Yeah, I love that. How do you parent differently because you are a pediatric oncology nurse?
That's a really interesting question. I might have to really think about that in a way that is really thoughtful, but I am definitely, first off, I wouldn't say I'm hands off, but I let my kids do stuff. Like, I've seen so many kids die and so many kids in so much pain. And if my daughter wants to do something that's slightly questionable, I'm like, yeah, dude, do it. Like, live your life. Like, I'm not gonna, don't let me tread on your happiness. That doesn't mean I'm gonna let them do something stupid, but
sure.
I want them to experience life. I want them to bump into things. I want them to hurt. I want them to love. I want them to laugh. I want them to learn, and all the L's. And
alliteration there. It's very good alliteration.
Yeah, learn, love, laugh. There's Papa. Because I've seen so many kids have such short lives, and I could have a shorter life. Who knows what will happen after this interview? I might choke on a chicken bone. And how do I know my daughter's going to live to be 8 years old? I don't think it's morbid to think about these things, because I think that's how life works. I'm a fatalist. Like, I want my kids to be happy. So I think, having seen so many intense situations and seen so many short lives, like, I don't want my kids to waste 1 second of their lives. And I want them to know how precious it is.
So that is weighty. And as a mom, there's certain things that once you have a kid, you just can't handle. And before I was a mom, I knew I could not handle children and living and watching that stuff. But I saw it as an adult, and it does change you, even when you see adults dying of cancer. And you're seeing these things that you're like, I'm 22 years old. I had no idea people were dealing with these things, because I was a little bit sheltered from them. And then, again, when you realize that children don't make it until 8 years old, you could die at 2. And these different things that you have to kind of process and then begin to just act normal, right, with your kid, and not be this panicked parent of like, oh my gosh, what is that? I could see it translating into very clearly and very easily into anxiety.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Where you have now turned it into a meditative practice. I almost kind of feel, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, it almost feels like a therapeutic expression of what you've seen at your job, and trying to share it with the world and probably process it and mull it over and deal with it yourself. I guess
lots of processing for sure, but it wasn't, in some ways it wasn't an active process. I didn't make myself do anything. I am who I am.
So I guess I meant, like, as you write and as you create, does it help you kind of process and, I guess, kind of, I don't know, maybe meditatively or just kind of spiritually deal with the heaviness of the things that you see, or does it not? I mean, I feel like it has to come out some way.
Yeah, right? It has to come out in some way. So first and foremost, I am an artist. Like, no matter what I'm doing, I'm going to be making a painting, sculpting, writing, playing music. I got to do it. It's just like in my bones. It's in my heart. I have no choice. Yeah. So right now, I'm a nurse. I'm a father, and that's where it comes out. I write about nursing. I write about being a father. It's just like me, just like interacting with the world. And for this book specifically, I had to go to some very dark places. I had to go through some dark tunnels to get out on the other side and to be able to write something that was coherently true.
Yes.
I was always talking, because this book isn't just about me. I interviewed 30 or 40 people for it, nurses, doctors, former patients, parents who lost their kids. It was an intense process of like getting into people's hearts, like in such a deep way. And that's kind of why the book is so powerful, because you don't hear just my perspective. You hear like so many perspectives. And I grew in that process. It was just tremendous. But I would always, as I was having people read the book when it was in the process of being written, my question would always be, not is it good, but is it true? Like, can you read this and is it true? And that's all that was important to me, that I was making something true. And here's the thing, Sandra, the truth hurts a lot sometimes. If you're going to be true, you have to be okay with coming off like an and sometimes I'm an
Yeah.
Can we swear on this?
Typically we don't.
Okay, sorry.
No, but I feel like what you're saying is really weighty. It's just super weighty. And I feel like if people, especially nurses and in particular parents, when they read your book and when they listen to your podcast, what are you hoping that they walk away with when they read your work?
So as an artist, I think the biggest mistake you can make is to have a heavy-handed expectation for what you want somebody to experience. That being said, I want somebody to listen to Nurse Papa or read Nurse Papa and go, hey, that's me too. Because like that's the best kind of form of art, is when somebody can just look at it and completely relate to it. That's when you laugh the hardest, and that's when you cry the most, is when you feel like, oh, I was there, or I'm going to be there. And I feel like it's such a human experience to relate to others and to make art that others can see themselves in.
Yeah, because that's what I described, right? Like when I was talking about your podcast, I walked away and was like, yeah, me too. Like, yeah, I can relate to what he's writing here. One of the things that you described, and I'll just share this, David, because I think it's something very important. But when I went part-time at my job, it was for the mindset that you just said. And it almost makes me feel crazy to say it because it's one of those things that you don't want to talk about. But I did look at my life and think, if I died tomorrow, and again, I think when you've been an oncology nurse, you see it a little more closely, right? Like you really do, it hits you in the face a little bit more than other areas of nursing care. But I just remember thinking, and because I've had that background, I do tend to go back to that spot and just kind of assess my life. And like, you don't know, you could choke on a chicken bone, like you said, today. Like,
unless you're a vegetarian, but yes.
Yes, unless you're a vegetarian. And then if you are vegetarian, you choke on a chicken bone, everyone's going to know you're not. So just don't choke on the chicken bone.
You don't want to get outed right when you die.
Exactly.
He eats meat.
Exactly. So make sure you swallow that. But anyway, my point being that I did assess my career decision based on what I had seen as a nurse and just said, what? If that is what you don't know when you're going to die. You don't know how this all ends. What do you want the time that you're living to look like? I knew I didn't want it to, I knew it did not want my time to be poured into my job. And so I know that it's kind of hard to do the job of an oncology nurse, but it does you a big favor in the fact that you have to be faced with life or death so much that you begin to really look at it in yourself. It's a gift that it gives yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know. That's how I felt.
Yeah, it's a total gift. I love taking care of people. And one of my favorite things to do, and this might sound weird, is end of life care. I think it's a beautiful thing to do. I love being that nurse who can take care of a child who is dying, because you're doing such a service to them. If you can make a dying child as pain-free and happy as possible when they're dying, and to give their family as much comfort, like, I don't know, like, man, I'd rather do that than be Bill Gates or Elon Musk. I don't need any money. Like, that's just to be of service is like the best payment that you can ever ask for anything. But I always think, and this is something that it took me a long time to realize, is that there is so much pain in the world. There are wars going on. There's a famine. There is just like, it is endless. But just because you don't know about it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So I want to be there. I want to be at that bedside, and I want to experience it, because it is the mark of living a full life, of just being available to what is there. Because you can like live in a box, but like, man, you're going to die in that box too. It's just not worth it. Sorry. You're supposed to make me cry.
No, I'm not. This podcast is not supposed to be about that. But I think what you just shared is really beautiful. So let's take it from the second question, which is, take me through when you decided to become a nurse and kind of your program that you went through that you told me about. Mm-hmm. And then kind of how you started all these other side hustles and side things and adjuncts to your current nursing role.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you how I became a nurse, and it is like the least sexy story. It is so dumb. So my mom is a nurse, my dad is a doctor, but I can't say that they actually inspired me to go into medicine. I was a sculptor and a painter for a long time, and I think I was coming back from a job that was in Florida, in Hollywood, Florida. I don't know how close that is to Gainesville. Yeah, but I was just like, oh man, I am over this. I need to do something else. And I sat down and turned on the TV, and ER came on, that like hospital show. And I was like, oh, why don't I be a nurse? It's like so stupid. And I looked into it, and it seemed to be a job that made sense. I applied to school. I did this funny thing where it's really hard to get into my program. So I actually printed out an acceptance letter and even photoshopped like UCSF insignia on it. And I sent it out to all my friends. And I said, print this out and send it to me. And like 30 of my friends sent me like an acceptance letter. And then like a week later, I got accepted, and it was like almost the exact same letter. Like it was so like weird. Anyway, so to how I became a nurse, I don't think it's that interesting of a story, but how I became a pediatric nurse, I think is really interesting. Yeah. So my program, unfortunately, they make you pick what kind of nurse you want to be before you go to school, which is like telling a 2-year-old child, like, tell me what you want to major in college before you go to kindergarten. It's just ridiculous. Like it's like to make their life easier and not make you the person you should be. So I picked adult acute care. That seemed to make sense. I didn't know anything about kids. So I started my program. We had to do all the different demographics of nursing. So the first day that I work in pediatrics, I'm like standing in the hall with my finger at my nose, and this nurse taps me on the shoulder. She's like, I need you to come help me. She brings me into this room, and there's this little girl. She's like 2 years old, and all alone, standing in her crib and like this in a diaper, and she's covered with all these horrible sores. So she had Stevens-Johnson's disorder, which is a autoimmune disease that's fairly common. When I saw her, I almost fainted. I was like, what is going on with this child? And then the nurse told me that she was probably going to be okay. And she's like, can you stay with her and just calm her down? Because she was screaming and there's no parent there. And I didn't know what to do. Like, how do you do that? So I just picked her up and I started singing her a song that I'd been working on. And she grabbed my thumb and she brought it to her face and she stopped crying. And we just stayed there swaying back and forth. And when I stopped singing, she started crying again. So I just kept it up. And that night I was laying in my bed, and I don't know how many times this has happened to you, but I had such a clarifying experience. I was staring at the ceiling, as I often do at nighttime. And I said to myself, I need to be a pediatric nurse. Like, there's no way I cannot work with kids. It just felt so right. And God, that doesn't happen very often. When the universe tells you something, you got to listen to it, because if you don't, you're going to be living a lie. So I literally, the next day, I went to my advisor and told her I'm dropping out of the program. Either you switch me to pediatrics or I'm dropping out. And she said, we can make it work. And of course, 2 weeks later, they took it back. So I dropped out. I got my nursing certificate, which I don't actually know what that actually means, but I've been working as a pediatric nurse for 15 years.
I don't really know if I'm licensed or not.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely licensed. I took the NCLEX. I kicked ass on it. 75 questions.
I'm just kidding. You're like, I really know what I have.
I'm gonna get like like, whoop, they're here. They've come for me. No, I'm all good.
That is an incredible story.
Yeah.
And so from there, and I know you described this earlier, that you're a creator and you're a sculptor and you're an artist at heart. And so as you were working in this field, when did you decide like, okay, I'm going to start podcasting about what I'm doing and I'm going to write a book about what I've seen? When did that come to fruition for you and your journey?
I didn't start writing the book until it made sense, until I had something to write about. And what really happened was I was a parent. I came into pediatric oncology barely being able to spell oncology. I can spell it really well now, but I wasn't a parent. I don't think I understood what it meant to be a parent until I was one. And when I became a dad and then a dad of two, just the context of how I relate to these kids and these parents, especially, it just turned it over on its head. I went from sympathy to empathy. I don't know if that makes sense to you necessarily, but I went from being sorry for them to understanding how they must feel. And that changed my world. And then when that happened, I was able to start writing about it. I was able to understand what it might feel like to hear that your kid's going to die, or that you're going to have oncology treatment for 3 years and you don't know what's going to happen. Because I innately understand what it is to feel uncertain about what's going on with your child, because kids throw you for a loop constantly. It's just what they do. It's their job, and they do it so well. So once I had something to write about, I started writing. I was just waiting patiently for it to happen.
It's true. Kids take you for a loop. And I'll share, my kid has been on antibiotics. He had a little thing that's going around. Everybody has it. Mm-hmm. And he started on antibiotics. He's never been on antibiotics before. And he started on them for the very first time. And I was nervous about it because I was like, his gut microbiome and all that jazz. I started him on the antibiotics. And last night, on the date, that crazy story, that morning, I said, I know they say you're supposed to give it for 10 days, but I don't know why I feel like we need to stop it today. Mm-hmm. Don't know why I said this. My husband's like, I mean, you're a nurse practitioner. If you think we should stop it, we should stop it. I'm like, well, no, technically you should finish it. You don't stop antibiotics in the middle of a treatment, but I just have a weird feeling. And he's like, what do you want to do? I'm like, well, I'm going to just go with my science knowledge, which is just finish the drug. That night, I gave him another dose, and his entire arm just broke out in this itchy rash. And I know this is totally non-podcast related. I might even take this out, but between you and me, it was just this moment of what you're describing.
Following your intuition. Yeah. Yeah.
Following my intuition, for one. My husband was like, you said it. That's so weird. And then two, he was like, the other part of no, I know where I was going with this. The out of control part, just realizing that I have no control over what happens to this human. My heart walks outside of my body, and that you don't understand until you become a parent, right? Yeah. My heart will forever walk outside of my body, and I am absolutely not in control of what's going on here. And I just have to manage.
I mean, and it's a roller coaster. I know that's kind of a trite expression, but I have an episode of the Nurse Papa podcast coming out tomorrow, actually. And in it, I describe this kind of roller coaster of being a parent. It's just that stomach twisting, dropping feeling of being out of control and liking it, because it's just it's such a game. It's the most serious game you'll ever play, but it's so fun. And I think I encounter parents all the time, thousands of parents, and I see all these different ways that they parent. And that's why it's been so amazing for me to not study it, but be aware of it, be a keen observer of these different techniques of parenthood. And for me, the best way to parent is to just enjoy it and go for the ride and, keep those kids safe. But you just got to be uncomfortable. You got to be afraid. You got to be sad. You got to be mad, but you just got to be happy at the same time. There's even when I'm screaming at my kids, which I try not to do, I'm still happy. I'm it's so funny because I was trying to get the kids out of the house a couple of days ago, and they were just we were going to be late. We have to drive 10 minutes to school. It was just going to be such a mess, parking, everything. And I just raised my voice and I said, get in the car. And immediately they got in the car. And my wife was like, why are you so upset? I'm like, I'm not upset at all. I just know that they need to think I'm upset because they need to get in the damn car. I just want them to be a little afraid in this moment.
Yes. No, I know exactly what you're talking about. And one of the things that I always do too in parenting Benjamin is when I say something very sternly, if you don't get in there right now And then he's like, okay, mama. And then I'm like, I love you. He's like, I love you too. And I'm like, cause I just want him to know, like, even though I'm being stern right now and I'm trying to put a little fire under your pants, like, don't forget that, like, I love you. Or the big one is when he puts his head down. Well, if he puts his head down, I immediately stop whatever we're doing. I'm like, wait. Did you put your head down? You need to pick that head up.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, mama. And I'm like, I'm not scolding you to put you down or to make you feel shame, or I don't know what emotion this is.
I'm trying to raise you up.
I want to capture that moment and make sure that is not getting reinforced. And so it's just, you have to be super intentional, super awake, super present. And
present
that's
is
all
the
you
key.
Can do.
Yeah, no,
that's all you can do.
Absolutely. It's funny. And I'll send you a video. I have this video of playing a song on my ukulele, and there's actually a chicken on the end of my ukulele, one of our little chickens. And one of the lines in the song is, "You don't know how much I love you." And my son was listening on the side. He's like, "Yes, we do." And that has just killed me, because like, it's so important. Like, if your kids know that you love them, you're like 99% there. Like, you've done your job. You can go to bed at that point.
Yeah, well said. Oh my gosh, David, I'm going to have to like edit this out for my crying constantly throughout this podcast episode. So that is your journey to where you are now. Can you tell me about maybe one of the times throughout your journey? Because you didn't wake up one day and have a podcast and a book and have a great career in pediatric oncology that you love. There's been a journey to this spot, right? And going and creating these little side streams and little things that you've been able to express yourself through. Can you share with my listeners maybe a challenge that you had to overcome throughout your career? And then maybe a real big success, a high, a moment that you were like, or maybe one that's coming up that you're like, this is it. I'm super excited about this thing that we've got going on in regards to your career.
I mean, I've had challenges like everybody else. I definitely experienced some nurse bullying when I was a new nurse. It was crazy. I thought after 6 months of nursing that I was actually going to fail at something for the first time, which was terrifying to me, because I mean, it's not like I've excelled at everything in my life, but I've never failed and I've never given up. And I thought, I'm going to fail, because I was getting my butt kicked by these just poison people. And what saved me was like other colleagues who became my mentor and who stood up for me and really kind of like raised me up instead of breaking me down. So yeah, that was a huge, huge challenge. And I think actually like our floor was pretty decent. It was just a couple poisoned attitudes, but I think typically like it's a real problem in the nursing world. Yeah. I mean, I've only worked one place in my entire nursing career, so I don't have that much perspective, but yeah, I've had so many mentors.
It's been a challenge for you. What about, so what about any moments in your career that you're like, this is a high, this is it, I'm excited about?
I mean, every day that I go to work and I make a kid smile, or I make a good intervention between a child and a therapy that is dangerous, because things sneak through. I'm like, oh, let's not do this because you missed this. Like, what's crazy is that I've been doing this for 15 years. I don't know everything. There's many things I don't know, but I know a hell of a lot more than a first year resident. So like, there's just like the nurse being the last barrier to harm coming to their patient. There's so much opportunity to like politely educate somebody who makes a bad call. So there are many, many things I'm proud of, but just being a good person, having the opportunity to be a good person every day. First of all, it's my pleasure. Like, I'm like, oh, dude, thanks for paying me to do this. And also letting me feel these feelings, like these deep, deep feelings of gratitude every day I go to work. Just being with these kids and these parents, like, that's just the joy of it. Like, I don't need anything else. And we're talking about dying tomorrow. Like, whatever happens, like, if I die tomorrow, I'm good. Like, I've been so blessed in my life. I've gotten everything I've wanted. I've worked hard, and I've achieved a level of satisfaction. I could die tomorrow. I just want my kids to be okay. Like, that's all there is to it. And ultimately, if I died, my kids wouldn't be okay. So I'm gonna have to stick around for a while. Wait till they're 18.
Yep. I hear you on that. And so you describe mentors, and that's one of the things that I have found in nursing that is lacking. And I have not had great opportunities for mentorship, and even convictingly so, have I been the best mentor? I mean, that's kind of one of the things I've been asking myself. So, but could you describe maybe people that have come alongside that you want to come alongside you, that you want to shout out, that you're like, this person had my back and it changed the game because they came alongside and they said, you're not going to walk alone. I'm going to walk with you.
I mean, that happens all the time. And I think it's much more than that. Like, yeah, of course I had people who were explicitly at my back who said, he's a good guy. Like, let's just give him some time. But I am a big fan of implicit education and mentoring, like seeing what people do and seeing what works and then doing it. So I'll tell you 2 stories. Do we have time for this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Tell me.
The first story is a nurse mentor. And I remember I was a young nurse. I didn't know anything. And I was taking care of a dying teenage boy. And I was with another nurse at the boy's bedside. And the boy's dad was, standing over him. And the boy was actively dying. And the dad was just so there in that moment. He just wanted to take care of his son. And the nurse said this most amazing thing to him. She said, have you told him that it's okay to go? And in that moment, I was like, what are you saying to this dad? You can't tell him that it's okay if his son dies. But it was the most beautiful thing you could ever say to somebody, because kids need their parents' permission. That's all they want. They want to make sure their parents are okay and that they'll be okay when they're gone. And it was like this nurse she'd been in the trenches. She knew what she was doing. She was an expert at what she did. And not only as her nursing side, but just her ability to be a human. And I was like, seeing things like that and being able to like take them in and really know what a person needs, that's what mentorship is. Okay, that's one story. You ready for number 2? Because if you're crying for number 1, number 2 is going to kill you. So it's not just nurses who are mentors. It's patients and their parents. So I was taking care of this other boy, and this is when I've been a nurse for 12 years at this point. I knew what I was doing. And he had a disease called DIPG. It's a brain tumor it's one of those brain tumors where you will definitely die. It's just going to happen. Like, we're all going to die, but this kid's going to die within 2 years. And it's going to be a steady neurological progression where when I first knew him, he had trouble moving around, but he could talk, he could breathe on his own. And then I walked into his room one day and I hadn't seen him for like 6 months. And he was his disease had progressed so much. He was almost blind. He could barely hear, to the point where his parents were always screaming in his ear, which was like such a scene. Parents screaming in his ear just so he could hear them say, I love you. Or do you want me? Do you want this? He was having lots of respiratory problems. Like, he could barely breathe. His secretions were so crazy. We would just stand there and looking at the sat monitor, waiting for it to go back up. Anyway, I'm standing there at this boy's bedside and his mom's holding his hand. And she's telling me about all the things he did and was when he was healthy. Like, he was an Eagle Scout. He was so good at mathematics. He was really into cars. He's like, I want a Tesla. That's what I want when I grow up. And just blowing his stuff up about what a great kid he was. And then I'll never forget, she grabbed his hand and she looked me right in the eyes and she said, I'm so proud of who my son became. And that just like, in that moment, it just like, I almost fell to the floor, because like, what is a better example of what it means to be a parent? You don't get your kids to do what you want. You get to where your kids want to be, and you be that mentor, and you be proud of them for what they are, not for what they could be, not for what they were. And that just killed me. It just killed me. And that's the most important thing I've ever learned nursing. And I learned it from a parent who wasn't trying to teach me anything. She was just trying to be there for her son. And he died. He died a while back. And his parents came back to the hospital and they wanted to say hi to me. And I wasn't there, but somebody told me that they like bought a Tesla so they could have a Tesla because their son wanted one so badly. They came to the hospital on his birthday for all days. Anyway, mentorship. You never know where those lessons are going to come from, but they're going to come. You just got to be open to it. And then you write a book about it.
Oh my gosh, David. Ooh.
These stories are hard to hear. I'm seeing this. But like,
yeah,
they're not bad to hear, right? Like these are important stories to hear. And it's okay to cry. Crying is the best. You ever get that cry where you're like snotty and it's just like, you're like, I love that. I love when I'm like crying because I'm like, oh, I'm fully alive in this moment because I am sad about something.
True, but
like it's better than sitting there watching Netflix and just like, oh, I'm watching New Girl for like the 10th time. I've seen this episode so many times.
Mind-numbing. I mean, it's true. What you're describing is like mind-numbing Netflix instead of being awake and alive and experiencing and feeling things. Like it's a very different experience. I think what I'm just feeling and what I want to convey to my listeners is why it's so important to live every day when you're at work to enjoy the journey of our lives. Because if you get so caught up in work and you have this life-altering jolt, and it can be a child's illness, it can be your own illness. So many stories in my podcast are from people that have experienced something terrible happening to them that makes them wake up and say, what am I doing with my life? Mm-hmm. And as you describe these stories of children that unfortunately aren't given the time frame to even become a nurse, right? To even become
they don't know what something. They want. They don't know what they can be.
They don't get the time, right? They didn't get the shot to do these things. You owe it to yourself and you owe it to everyone around you to do exactly what brings you joy in life and makes you feel alive. And if that is being a mom and staying home, do it. If that is working part-time and staying home, and maybe you get slack from people at work about how you're not full-time anymore, do it. Like, do that thing, because what you're describing in both of those stories is feeling life and enjoying every moment and realizing that you don't know how long, and it's about people. It's all about the people around you and the connections and the relationships that you have. Absolutely. That's the stuff that matters. Everything else doesn't matter. The money doesn't matter. The house doesn't matter. The clothes, all this stuff that we chase after. It doesn't.
It's true. Like, it does matter in the sense that we all need to clothe and house ourselves. And like, sometimes you just got to feed the machine, right? You got to go work when you don't want to. You got to do this when you don't want to. You got to do that when you don't want to. But if you can do it with joy, that's better. It's so much better because you'll bring something to it that would otherwise not be there. Like, I would much rather be at work laughing between different rooms, which I am. Like, I love just like that space between different rooms because you don't ever know what you're going to get when you enter a new hospital. But if you do it with joy and you do it with purpose, you're going to just enjoy it so much more. Like, sometimes you do have to fake it until you make it.
Yeah.
I don't have to fake it too often to enjoy it.
That's good. David, could you give me a piece of advice for a new nurse that's starting off in her career that you would want her to keep close to her heart, and a piece of advice that you would tell her, if you hear this, don't listen to it because it's garbage?
Okay. One thing I would tell any new nurse is that rarely, only about 5% of the time, is it a true emergency. Like, there will be times when you walk into a room and a child is blue and you're like, oh, that's anaphylaxis and you need to take care of that. Epi, everything, code. But that's like not a very common thing that happens in the hospital. Like, most things, you can slow down, you can stop, and you can think. And you can do something that is appropriate and right. Don't fly off the handle. Don't react. And that has to go. That is for like anything in life. I'm talking medical, psychosocial, everything. Anything that throws you for a loop, it's not an emergency. You can figure it out. Don't react. Don't react. Think. And then you can make it through it. Get some help. There's so many things. And then you said something that people shouldn't do.
Yeah, something that if you hear, it's just like, don't listen to that. That's not
like
true.
When anybody tells you can't do something, like, oh, you want to go into this type of nursing, you can't do that. I remember when I told my grandmother I was going to be a nurse, the first thing she said to me, she's like, a nurse? That's for women. You can't do that.
Yeah.
And like, she meant well. I mean, she just was coming from a different generation. And because her daughter was a nurse. And, you know, I didn't take that to heart. I still became a nurse.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't listen to the naysayers. They'll just drag you down.
Yeah.
Surround yourself by positive people. Like, that is what you want to do. Surround yourself by people whose eyes light up when you enter the room. That's what you got to do.
Yeah, that's good advice. So the last part of the interview is the rapid fire questions.
Okay.
What's your favorite holiday?
Thanksgiving. Because I love the food. I love the family. I love the gathering. I don't like the social cultural implications of people coming to the New World and killing Native Americans. But that's okay. You can repurpose it to something different. I'm sorry, you're Italian, right?
No, I'm not Italian.
You know, what's magenta?
That's my husband's last name. I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not Italian, it is Italian.
What's your ethnic background?
I'm Puerto Rican and African American.
You're Puerto Rican, African American. Okay. So you're on my side.
I'm not on anybody's side. Okay, I'm a mix.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm on two sides.
So my wife is Indian. My kids are biracial, like your kids, and like, aren't they the most beautiful kids in the world? Like, those biracial kids are just like, oh my god! I look at my son and daughter. I'm like, man, you are so, I'm beautiful all the time. All right, this is not rapid.
So, what's your favorite pizza topping?
Oh, jalapenos, corn. Well, I make pizza, so every Friday night we make pizza, and my favorite one is jalapeno, corn, and pepper on top of it.
Yeah. Okay. And if you had to pick a spirit animal, what?
I'll tell you right now.
Animal do you feel like it is?
My spirit animal is a jackrabbit.
A jackrabbit.
Yeah, and I have actually encountered a jackrabbit in the desert, and we had a very spiritual experience. Can't talk about that. I can't give you too many details about that. But yeah, it's a jackrabbit.
Honestly, I get the most interesting answers for these things. I love it.
What is your spirit animal?
Great. Thanks for asking.
No problem. I'm interested in people. I'm going to ask the questions now. I'm doing rapid fire.
This is your podcast. Let me, like, what animal do I feel like I would...
Have you never thought about this? You asked this question?
I've never thought about it.
Dear God, Sandra.
I've never thought about it.
What's your favorite holiday?
I feel like my spirit animal is an ostrich.
An ostrich?
Yes.
Okay. I like it.
I don't really know why. I just feel like a giraffe or an ostrich, like something long, because I'm a tall girl, like 5'9". But there's also something about the way, like, an ostrich, I think I'm more of an ostrich because it's a little bird-like. And, like, I feel like I could be a little more like, and then get my wings going. I don't know. I just kind of, just like, a giraffe's a little too slow. Like, an ostrich is a little more on my, like, frequency.
Well, I've spent a lot of time with birds recently, as I mentioned to you before we started recording, because I've got 8 chickens. And it's so funny. I look at them, and I see them looking at me, and I think to myself, if you were the size of an ostrich, you would definitely eat me. It's so funny. I'm like, you just can't do it. But if you could, you would.
Yeah, like, an ostrich is super powerful too, which is why like it's just like a form, like it's not
they can kill somebody by kicking it. Yeah, no, they're very powerful.
You don't think of it.
But you also hear about an ostrich like they're being cowardly. Is that true, or is that just like a cartoon thing?
They say like they put their head in the sand.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. But like,
because you don't seem like that's what you would do.
Yeah. I didn't know about that. Like, I have to study their their behaviors in the wild a little bit more.
Okay, get back to me on that, Kim.
I will. I'll get back to you on that. So, David, where can people find you? Where can they hear your podcast, get your book? Give a shameless plug for my listeners as we sign off.
There's nothing shameless about it. So you can find my book on Amazon. It's called Nurse Papa, 16 Meditations on Parenthood from a Pediatric Oncology Nurse. It's also in many local bookstores in the Bay Area. But if you're not in the Bay Area, Amazon's going to be your best bet. If you want to support your local bookstore, enter the bookstore, go to the person in charge and say, I'd like to get this book. And they'll say, we don't carry Nurse Papa here. And you'll say, well, can you order it for me? And they'll say, sure, we can order it. So that's the best way to get this book is to ask your local bookstore, support your brick and mortar, and get that book to you. The podcast, you can hear it anywhere on whatever podcast platform you listen to. Is also Nurse Papa. It's hilarious. Each episode is 15 minutes. It's very digestible. You can listen to it on the way to work or while you're ignoring your spouse. And it's funny, when I got AirPods, those are like the noise canceling headphones, it almost ended my marriage because my wife could literally be behind me screaming and I'd be like, da, 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 da. So definitely AirPods, great for a marriage. So, and yeah, the podcast is super fun. And one thing that my listeners do is they write me letters and letters of parenthood, questions. I get the most amazing letters and I do lots of research and I answer their questions. So if you are interested in interacting with me and being on my podcast, meaning I will read your letter and answer it, email me, david@nursepapathebook.com, and let's solve these problems together.
Oh man, that is so deep. I feel like this podcast episode has been an emotional roller coaster. I mean,
can tell.
Just
you're gonna need a hug.
And then I think I do. I'm gonna go out there and hug my kid as soon as I'm done with this, and have my husband hug me because it was just. Again, I don't know if you always have this effect on podcasts or it's just on mine, but I think it was just really deep. And I'm really thankful that you came on.
Oh, yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Something about me, and I don't know if it's particularly unique, but I just have zero filter. I mean, I know how to act appropriately. I put on my pants the right way. I will not do something grossly inappropriate, but I'm not going to have a conversation with you at a party or on a podcast. If we're going to talk about something, we're going to be fully real. And that means talking about things that are hard and talking about things that are hilarious and having those things happen in the same breath, because it's just that's what life is. It's multifactorial. It has lots of emotions. It's messy. And if you can't deal with it, you might as well not appear on podcasts.
Yeah. And it's life. I think this is life. So, well, it was just perfectly depicted. So thank you for sharing and thank you for your time today.
That's my pleasure.
Thank you for coming on and sharing everything that you did today. And I know people are going to get something out of it. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely happy to be here. And one more plug. I will tell your listeners that, May 11th, 9 p.m. hour, NBC Today show. We'll be talking about my book with the anchor. So that's something that's coming up.
I cannot wait to put that on here. I will definitely link that in the show notes.
Yeah, I'll send you the link
out when that comes out.
Yeah, or just
that'll be perfect.
If you link it, then I can give you the website before, after it comes out. So you can do it after it comes out. You don't have to do it beforehand. That's fine. I'm going to stress you out, Sandra. You got too much going on already.